It's causing concerns in Pakistan and among Arab states, the growing military relationship between India and Israel. So why are both countries getting so cozy? Have the billion-dollar defense deals been sanctioned by Washington? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Darren Jordan. Well, it's been causing alarm bells to ring from Pakistan to the wider Arab world and even in India itself. It's the growing military cooperation between Israel and India. New Delhi has just approved another multi-billion-dollar defense deal with Tel Aviv, and a delegation of Israeli army officials is expected to arrive in Indian-controlled Kashmir. Reports say the Israelis have installed a sophisticated surveillance system to help check the infiltration of militants from the Pakistani side of the border. Mohammed Shakir has more on this emerging military and strategic alliance.
In just over 10 years, bilateral trade has jumped from a tiny $200 million a year to almost $3 billion today. Yet, this is overshadowed by the pace of their growing military ties, with Israel now India's second biggest defense supplier. Between 2002 and 2007, India purchased over $5 billion worth of equipment, with the two countries signing their biggest deal to date in August, amid plans to jointly produce surface-to-air missiles worth some $2.5 billion. The tempo could increase even further, with India considering at least 18 defense projects, which Tel Aviv could be a partner. So whilst Indian recognition of Israel came late in only 1992, the two have established strong military and strategic ties. India's loss of its Cold War patron, the Soviet Union, meant it needed a new weapons supplier. With Israeli help, New Delhi embarked on a major modernization of its armed forces. Significantly, Israel is believed to have trained Indian army units in counterinsurgency for duty in the disputed territory of Kashmir. And just last month, there were reports that India launched an Israeli spy satellite. The quantum leap in the two countries' relations appears driven by converging interests. Both face unconventional warfare and fear radical Islamists. Even more importantly, India is seeking a counterweight to neighboring Pakistan. New Delhi accuses Islamabad of supporting terrorism. While Israel seeks to shore up support amid fears of an alleged Iran nuclear program, for its part, the US has lent its support to the relationship, with Washington hoping to check China's rise. And while there has been some unease in India about the growing ties, they look set to continue.
Well, joining us now are guests in New Delhi, Commodore Uday Bhaskar, a security expert and former director of the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis. In Tel Aviv, Felix Frisch, the military correspondent for the Maariv Daily. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Felix Frisch in Tel Aviv, let me start with you, if I may. How would you describe the relationship between India and Israel? And is it based on similar military values and indeed threats?
Good evening. I think we speak not only about military values, but also of same or mutual democratic heritage. The both states got their independence in the same year after a long British regime. They discovered each other only in 1992 after the fall apart of the USSR, but I think they share more than only military values. And why to deny? There's also a very good business for Israeli defense industries, as well as for the Indian military and for their industries, which work together, which are developing together defense systems.
Okay, we'll come back to some of those points a little bit later. Commodore Uday Bhaskar, India once had a very pro-Arab stance, didn't it? And was very much against any dealings at all with Israel. What's caused the change in policy, do you think?
It was really the end of the Cold War that allowed India to carry out a review of its relations in the Middle East, West Asia. And as you rightly observed, historically, India has always had a very close relationship with the Arab world. It goes back to the days of Mr. Nasser in Egypt, when Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru was there in India. So there is a tradition of a very close relationship between India and the Arab world. But after the end of the Cold War, as part of a more inclusive foreign policy, India also came to the conclusion that it was desirable to have full diplomatic relations with Israel. And That's when it started in 1992. But the way India went about this was not to make it an either-or kind of choice. Very close friends in the Arab world were informed about India's decision. This was when Mr. Narasimha Rao was our Prime Minister. Everyone credits him with what is called as the economic liberalization of India and India's policies. I believe there was also an element of politico-diplomatic liberalization as far as India's external policies were concerned, and the relationship with Israel was part of that balance in India's broader relationship with the region. So to that extent, I think it was nuanced. It was not either or in terms of choices. And in a way, let me also add, Darren, that India was following the lead of some of the major Arab countries, such as Egypt, which had begun the process of normalization of relations with Israel.
All right, let's just get another point there from Felix Frisch in Tel Aviv. I mean, it's a point you made earlier, Felix, that the Indian cabinet's recently approved this kind of multi-billion-dollar defense deal with Israel. I mean, this is clearly good news for the Israeli defense industry, isn't it?
Yes, of course. It's the unique largest defense project. But previously there were some more very big projects, such as $1.1 billion project of early warning 3 aircraft, which are, by the way, made by Russian industries and are fully equipped in Israel, and then they are supplied to India. There were unmanned air vehicles which were sold to India in the early 90s. And one of them was shut down, and that's the way how the mutual relationships were discovered by the world. So there are plenty of more deals in the past, and I think also in the future they're developing. Israeli industries and India's military are developing together the next generation air defense interceptors called Barak 8 or Lightning 8. There are lots of projects on the way.
Let me just ask you briefly, Felix, I mean, just how trustworthy is the relationship in the sense that could Israel, for instance, rely on India's support against Iran's nuclear program, for example?
Well, I think in this place lies a very thick line. I don't think Israel relies or plans on some operational cooperation with India, as well as with other close allies like Turkey. I think except the US, Israel doesn't rely on anybody to cooperate with it in physical fighting. But there are very close relationships in matters of anti-terror struggle or anti-terror war. As you mentioned previously, Israeli special units used to train Indian special units in the couple of years ago after India became after India became a victim of Islamic extremist terror. So the relationships are very good, but there's a line. I don't think Israeli aircraft will fly over India in order to attack some enemy state, and I really don't think there are any enemies of Israel in that part of the world. So everybody can be quiet.
Let me just ask you a final question before we go to the break. I mean, could there be any strategic disadvantage to closer ties with Israel for India, as Arab countries could start to isolate New Delhi, couldn't they?
Well, I think India is a very powerful state. It's an regional superpower. So I don't think India could get any damage or be really harmed by being boycotted or isolated by Arab states. But India does its calculations, and of course, as the other specialist told us before, they managed to deal with Arab states as well as with Israel, and I think today it's not such a shame to be friends with Israel as it was about 20 or 30 years ago.
Okay, gentlemen, stay with us, won't you? Because it's time for a short break now, but when we come back, how nervous is neighboring Pakistan about the Indian-Israeli deal, and is Washington really pulling the strings?